With the 2019 season in full swing, I thought it was about time I did an update on my new long-term bike. It's a Scott Scale RC 900. It is a very high-end bike and ridden by one of the greatest cross-country racers of all time, Nino Schurter. So chances are it is going to be very fast. But pro-level speed isn't the only deciding factor on what makes a great cross-country bike. And having already spent around 150 hours riding this bike, I feel well placed to give my initial verdict. As you can see, I've already made some upgrades to this bike, but there's plenty to talk about with the original spec, so that's where I'm going to start. Coming just north of £5,000 in the UK, the RC 900 is certainly not a cheap bike, but thankfully it's got a really nice spec to go with that price. The frame set is made from Scott's HMX carbon fibre, which sits one model down from their top spec 897 gram per frame HMX SL carbon fibre. Now it might seem like a bit of a cop-out that £5 bike doesn't come with the top spec frame set, but apparently Scott's World Cup riders, guys like Nino Schurter, actually use the HMX level frame because it's a bit tougher than the HMX SL level frame. So if it's good enough for Nino Schurter, perhaps I shouldn't be complaining. The fork is a RockShox SID RL3 Air with a custom charger damper with 3 modes of adjustment. Thankfully, that's paired up with a cable lockout, so no dodgy hydraulic lockouts here. Up front, you also have Scott's striking Fraser IC one-piece bar and stem combo, but I'm going to say more about that later. The group set is a mix of SRAM XX1 and XO1 Eagle with a fairly amateur-friendly 32-tooth chainring up front. I really like that because my spindly legs can't handle things like a 36 or a 34-tooth chainring. The tyres are Maxxis Recon Race in the 2.25 inch size. Interestingly, Scott send the bike set up tubeless. That's really nice to see because a lot of brands will send a bike with really cheap inner tubes in and then you have to kind of spend more money getting them set up tubeless. So yeah, that's really good from Scott. And finally, the rest of the finishing kit is courtesy of Scott's in-house brand, Synchros, and that's all really nice stuff. In its stock spec, my size large weighed 9.3 kilos without pedals. Now that is plenty light enough for any weight-conscious XC racer. The scale has what I call conservatively progressive geometry, which means for an XC bike, it's not hugely stacked, but it's definitely not old-school steep. So the head angle is 69.5 degrees, the seat angle is 73.6 degrees, so fairly steep. The chainstays are nice and short at 425mm, and the reach in a size large is 443.3mm. Finally, the wheelbase is 1127.9mm. All this adds up to a bike which should handle fairly well on most XC and marathon courses without throwing up any nasty surprises. When riding the scale, it's hard not to slip into the usual cliches which litter any bike review. It is plenty stiff enough for my spindly 64 kilo frame, yet that carbon has an added level of comfort which old school hardtails definitely didn't have. Although you are still riding a razor sharp XC bike, so you do feel those bumps a bit on really long rides. I perhaps would have liked the seat angle to be a bit steeper than that 73.6 degrees, which would have allowed for a better seated position when climbing, but as you can expect from a 9.3 kilo bike, it climbs really well and just rockets up the climbs. So the only excuses I'll ever have on race day is going to be from my puny legs. Descending once again throws up little in the way of surprises. I haven't been able to do loads of racing on this bike yet, but one race I did in Lanzarote at the beginning of the year, there was lots of really fast fire roads and yeah, I didn't feel any problems with letting the brakes go and doing some Euro-esque fire road bombing on the scale. Hopefully by the time I do my next long-term update, I've done some more gnarly races with some tougher descents and I'll be able to give a better idea of its descending performance. As you can tell, I'm a big fan of the Scott scale, but there are a few quirks I'm not so sure about, and the first one is the Fraser IC bar and stem combo. The setup is incredibly stiff, but the bars at 720mm wide are a touch narrow for my taste, and I prefer something a bit wider. And as the old saying goes, you can make a wider bar narrower, but you can't make a narrower bar wider. Then obviously you have the adjustability issue. If you want to change the bar or you want to change the stem, you're going to have to buy a whole new bar and stem combo. And while Scott do offer the Fraser bar in plenty of different stem lengths, it's still a lot more expensive than going out and buying a stem on its own. I think the stock seat post which came on the bike is a little harsh and doesn't have quite enough compliance built into it to match the frame. This is something brands like Merida have done really well with the seat post on their Big 9 hardtail, and it makes a real difference to how battered your body feels after a long ride or race. However, as I've previously mentioned, these are just quirks and far from deal breakers, so don't let them put you off the scale. Now we're on to upgrades, and the first is the FSE XC30 Ultralight wheels. FSE, or Filament Spin Evolution, are a small company owned by a chap called Dan Kellerby. The unique part about the wheels are that they are filament wound. Dan is pretty cagey about giving any more information out about why filament winding is really good. Obviously he wants to protect his idea, but so far I have really liked the wheels. For one thing, they are incredibly light, weighing in at 1,190 grams for a pair of 29 XC race wheels. The rims are 30mm deep and 22mm wide, so not hugely wide when you compare them to other wheels, but they perform really well, and yeah, I've got no complaints about them so far. One thing I wasn't so sure about when I first got the wheels, but have now come to love, is the fact that the rim bed is fully sealed, which means no messing around with tubeless tape. Obviously, this does mean that replacing spokes can be quite difficult. The only way you can do it is by attaching a little bit of old spoke onto a new nipple, dropping it into the valve hole, then using a magnet to pull it round to pull it through the new spoke hole. That can be a bit of a faff, but I probably break maybe one spoke a year, but I spend a lot of time replacing tyres and having to retape rims, so I prefer the faff of replacing one spoke than rather retaping the rim every couple of months when I change tyres or change tubeless sealant. And so far they haven't lost any air, so sealed rim beds are a big thumbs up from me. I haven't done enough miles on these wheels to pass a full verdict, but I'm really impressed with them so far, and I think they could be a legitimate competitor to some of the big brands on the market. Next up is Schmokers bar and seat post. Now I've already done a first look on those, which you can find in the video description, but since then I've done plenty of miles on them. The Handlebar weighs just 96 grams, which is crazy light, and when you pick them up you just think, how are they going to hold my weight? They also have incredibly low torque values, things like 2 Newton meters or 1.5 Newton meters for the levers. So I was a bit worried when I put them on, but now I've spent a lot of time on them, I've been really impressed with them. Granted, they're not as rock solid stiff as something like an Envy cross country bar, but remember, they are half the weight, and they're plenty stiff enough for me, so yeah, it's something I really like. The seat post has taken a little longer to dial in. Once again, Schmokers spec incredibly low torque values on the clamp, and they recommend starting with the lowest value, then working your way up to the highest value. On the lowest torque value, I did find that I was getting some slippage on the saddle rails, which isn't ideal. Since then, I've torqued it up to the highest value and it hasn't moved, but I still want more time on the post before passing a final verdict. Where the post has really impressed is with the amount of flex and compliance built into it. I thought a seat post that weighed 119 grams would be quite stiff and brittle, so I've been pleasantly surprised that there's actually loads of movement in it. This is really good for the really long rides and races I like to do. It just makes me feel a bit more comfortable throughout the ride. And yeah, if you compare that to the Syncross post which originally came on the bike, the Schmoker feels quite a bit nicer. As you can tell, I've really enjoyed the first few months on my scale, and I'd thoroughly recommend it to any XC or marathon racer who wants a reliable race bike that throws up little in the way of surprises. But what do you guys think? Have I picked the ideal cross-country / marathon race bike, or should I be looking for something different? As always, let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.